Earlier this week, I made a post. I said the struggle of living with ADD is that people assume you don't hear them or misunderstand them because you're just lazy, ignorant, or not listening. People usually aren't sympathetic to the fact that your brain is wired to process information differently. ADD has been so trivialized they think you're making excuses. This leads to a lifetime of conflict, especially with authority figures who get frustrated with you for not being able to follow basic instructions. I can't tell you how often I heard that from teachers growing up. The reality was that my brain physically couldn't follow basic instructions. It's hard to understand if you haven't lived in our minds and experienced the kind of sensory overload we have to deal with every waking moment. And that got a lot of responses. So, for this week's mental health live stream, let's talk about that. So, when I was a kid, I struggled with this and didn't know it yet because when you're young, you don't really know, you don't have anything to compare yourself to. You're inexperienced. So, often children suffer with, they struggle with mental health issues and don't even know it yet. So, in my case, I didn't have the ability to compare my mind to anyone else's mind, and so I didn't realize what I was struggling with. So I would be unable to think about one thing at a time, and at any one moment, there were and still are several things cycling through my mind at once. And so when I got into school, I really struggled with this. And the teachers usually assumed that I was just being bad, that I was just a bad student. And so I got in trouble a lot for not listening. And at one point, I think it was sometime in the first grade, the teacher thought that I actually had a hearing problem. And so she took me in to get my hearing tested, and my hearing was fine. I do remember that, like having to go to the school library and wear these headphones with these weird pictures in front of me, and raise my hand every time I heard the beep or whatever. My hearing turned out to be fine. So at that point, it was determined that I had attention deficit disorder. So the teachers wanted to put me on Ritalin, and my parents said no. And I'm glad of that. And I think there's a huge problem with the overabundance of prescribing prescription drugs, especially to children. So, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, the problem was when the teacher would talk, I would only hear maybe some of what she heard or what she said, or maybe three-fourths of it, but I'd never hear the entire message, and this would lead to a lot of confusion for me. And there were a lot of times where I suffered for it. So, for example, and I just can't imagine. And as a kid, you think this is normal, and the parents and the teachers and the adults are always right, and as the kid, you're always taught that you're wrong. So I remember once uh, not completing a paper and turning it in incomplete, and this teacher called me up in front of the class, and I stood there in front of the class next to her desk, and she stood up in front of me with my incomplete paper in my hand and just pounded it and berated me in front of the entire class, just screaming at me what a failure I was and how I completed this assignment, and it was an embarrassment, and I actually broke down in tears over it. And once again, you think the teacher's right and I'm wrong, but no, now as an adult, I realized that was a form of child abuse, and that was cruelty, and she should have been ashamed of herself. And I wasn't the only student that she did that to. The same teacher did that to a bunch of kids who also ended up crying because of that. Because it's like it drew attention to the fact that I had trouble paying attention, had trouble completing my assignments, or what have you. And so, other examples like I remember teachers calling out my name, and I didn't actually even realize it. I didn't know that I'd been called on, and they'd call on my name a second time and a third time, and then I'd get in trouble again. And I was often in school getting sent to the principal's office. So people who know me today tend to think that I was a straight A student or whatever, but nothing could be further from the truth. I didn't get great grades in school. I managed to get by and pass, but especially in my younger years, I struggled with getting F's and different subjects. Some subjects I could, handle better than others. So what was going on in my brain, and I remember this really vividly. So, like, you'll say I'm at my desk and the teacher's speaking and she's giving us the important assignment information, and I'm thinking about other things, and I'm thinking about, the cartoon I watched the other day, and I'm thinking about what my mom is going to make for dinner tonight, and I'm thinking about, my favorite game to play on the playground, and eventually you've got 4 or 5 thoughts circling through your brain at once. And this happens all the time. I mean, I always thought this way. So every single day, every waking moment, there was at least 5 or 6 things, more things than I could even keep up with, cycling through my brain. And it's been demonstrated that, when your brain is trying to pay attention to more than one thing at a time, it loses track, and eventually you get fragmented information. So you're never going to completely absorb all the information. You're only going to absorb like parts of this information and parts of that information and parts of this and that. And so a good example of that is, why it's dangerous to text and drive, or any kind of multitasking, even talking on your phone and driving. I mean, they found out in studies that like if you're even with a hands-free device, it's very difficult to maintain a conversation and drive on the road at the same time, because the road situation, the road environments, there's some information you're not going to be able to process because your mind is also trying to process the information the person is telling you in your brain. But so now imagine in my case having to deal with 4 or 5 new forms of information all the time, constantly, never-ending cycle. And so when the teacher would say stuff, I wouldn't get the full instructions. And so I'd be very confused on my math test. And on those math tests, for example, and I really remember this. This is why I got an F in math. I actually, I could comprehend the arithmetic, like how to do the formulas, how to do the multiplication, how to do the subtraction, addition, all that stuff. But the problem was, during the test, I really struggled. And I struggle most with ADD in quiet environments. So during the test, for example, you got all the kids around you aren't speaking and no one's allowed to talk, and it's just absolute silence. That would actually make my ADD kick into overdrive. It's like my brain was trying to compensate for the silence. Now, the anxiety may have played a big part in this. So, I would be thinking about so many different things at once, and occasionally I'd get a math problem done. But I would keep doing this, and so the time would be over, the class would be over, and it'd be time to turn in the test, and I would only have a third of the test done. So you automatically get an X on every one you didn't finish. And so I'd get an F on the test. And then by the end of the school year, I got an F in math because of that, just because I didn't get the test right. And it's not that I couldn't do the math work, it's that I couldn't pay attention and focus on just the test long enough to complete it. So the problem with that is that the teacher would automatically assume I was bad, that I wasn't paying attention, and that I was a horrible child and I needed to be disciplined for not paying better attention in class. And in reality, I was a good kid. I was sincere. I didn't have any malicious intent. I wasn't intentionally ignoring her. And this cycling of information can be so pernicious that you don't even realize it or aren't aware of it. And I remember in the same class, I actually got in trouble because I had a pair of scissors in my hand. I don't remember how I came across them, but I was turned around, and in school you have these plastic chairs that you sit in at your desk, and I was actually carving pictures into the back of the desk, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. Like, my brain was working so quickly, I was not consciously aware of what I was doing. I was actually, defacing school property. And so I remember the teacher just getting mad and furious, come up to me and just grabbing me by the arm and just giving me a real... And once again, I didn't know what I was doing. And I remember her dragging me to the principal's office, and I was punished and, put in detention and all that. And my parents found out, and then I got home and I got in trouble because, how dare you do that? and we are too hard on kids, because so kids, they come into the world, and they're basically just raw material. Mentally speaking, they have absolutely no filter. They have no experience. Their minds haven't been shaped. Their cognitive processes aren't really in place yet. And we interpret a lot of their behavior as bad and malicious, and they're talking back, and they're not listening, and they need to be beaten, they need to be punished. And when in reality, a lot of the way kids act out comes from anxiety. So they're not processing the world right, or we're overloading them with too much information, which was happening to me. And so one of the big problems with the school system is that we're kind of assuming that the school system is right and the kids are wrong. So we built this whole system, this public schools and school buildings, and having kids go to school 9 to 5, or 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock, or whenever, and put them on school buses and shunt them off to school, and make them go through like an 8-hour work day, like working in an office, and go to different classes when the bell rings. And we just assumed that system is right, that system is correct, and it's great for kids. And the reality may actually be that that's not good for kids. And there are some kids that are going to struggle because kids' brains actually aren't wired or designed to be in that sort of an environment. And so we think the system is right and the kids are wrong. And so when the kids don't do well, we assume, well, punish the child. Beat it out of him. Hit him with a ruler. Send him to the principal's office. Tell his parents. We don't do all these things to fill our kids with dread and terror, and hating the teachers, and being afraid of the principal, and all that. And we never stop back and think, is this really a good system? Because it turns out the public school system was actually designed in post-industrial America. You've heard the cliche of back in the olden days, they used to have, the single school rooms, and that's true. And so the public school system was designed actually with the intent of keeping up with manufacturing. So as America was increasing in factories after World War II, and the rest of the country or the rest of the world was struggling to make a comeback with all the devastation from the war, America boomed, during the Eisenhower years within industry, and factories were everywhere, and middle class jobs popped up everywhere, and there was great prosperity. So the school system was designed with that in mind. That's why you have a bell ringing in between each period, is so it's training the kids to be obedient factory workers and not to think for themselves. And I can go on and on of how bad the public school system is about indoctrination, because if you can indoctrinate the kids to be left-wing thinkers, and that's why there's so much left-wing socialist propaganda, that's where schools get their money from, is from the government. It's a socialist system. And so kids will innately be more supportive of it. And again, that's why the school system is able to continue itself going year after year, generation after generation, getting more taxpayer money, getting more tax funding, teachers unions. All of these things were designed to keep this system that is actually overwhelmingly bad and detrimental to children in place. And it's a shame on our country. It's a detriment on us as a people. But anyway, I'm here to talk about attention deficit disorder. So we'll get on that again a little bit later. But so my teachers wanted to put me on Ritalin. My parents would not have it, and I'm glad and grateful for that. Once again, the assumption that we have in society is that, if the kid has trouble paying attention, it's something wrong with the child. They must have a disease. They must have something wrong with their brain. And it may actually be that attention deficit disorder is actually normal. It's actually a normal mental process, and maybe it's okay for the child to have it, and maybe it's actually the school system. If they're having trouble paying attention in school, maybe school's the problem. Maybe it's not the child. And so the child has trouble paying attention and really can't hear what the teacher is saying, and the child gets punished, and it creates lifelong struggles. And I still have attention deficit disorder, and I've struggled with it my entire life, and I've never taken any medication for it. But I have learned how to manage it on my own, again, because the school system is unforgiving, and it's very cruel, and it's designed to punish children for having different minds or thinking differently. I've fought on my own. I've helped myself with this, and that's part of where my stances of rugged individualism, not waiting for people to come and help you, of fixing your own problems, all that. That's where that originates. But so uh, as far as my current lifetime struggles, still to this day in adulthood, I have trouble just doing basic things around the house. Now, if it's a long term assignment, if it's a big project like repainting a room or something like that, I kind of have what I would call the opposite of ADD, where I focus so much on that one thing that I can't focus on anything else. And so, in a weird way, it's like ADD in reverse, but it's actually still a form of ADD because I cannot pay attention to other things going on. I have to focus on that mission until the mission is complete. Period. Case closed. End of story. And but as far as like the routine activities, like just doing small things around the house, like I drive my wife crazy because I'm constantly going back and forth around the house, and sometimes she'll be in another room and say, "What in the world are you doing?" Because she hears me stomping from one side of the house to the next. It's just simple tasks like I may have to go do something, and so I'll start walking to another room, and then halfway there, my brain will tell me, "Wait a minute, you need to go back, and there's something you need to do this task that you forgot." So I'll stop and have to go back to the other room, and then I'll be on my way back again, and then my feet will start hurting from walking on the hardwood floor, and then my brain will say, "But you also need to go back and get some foot support." So I need to go back and start looking around the house trying to find my flip flops or something, so it won't hurt my feet as much as I walk on the floor. And then while I'm in the middle of that, something else will occur to me, and so I get distracted so easily. So one thing that helps people with ADD is routines, and routines are actually really good for the human mind because decisions make us depressed. Did you know that? When we have to make decisions in life, if we have too many choices, we actually become unhappy because we overthink it, and no matter what choice you decide on, you'll always wonder in your mind, if I'd made a different choice, would I have enjoyed this more? So, like, if you go to a restaurant, the restaurant has this big menu with lots and lots and lots of items, it's harder to make a decision, and no matter what decision you come to, you're gonna wonder, what if I'd chosen something else? What if I enjoyed my meal more? Even if you do enjoy your meal, like, man, this is the best steak I've ever had, but what if I'd gotten the fried chicken instead? Would I be enjoying that more? And that's why, like, it's really bad when you have like satellite and you've got like 600 different channels. On paper you hear that and you think, man, that sounds really great. But then when you've got it, all you do is ever surf and you don't enjoy anything. You don't settle on a TV show to watch. So we need to reduce the amount of decisions we make every day, and we need to take the thought process out of work, and that actually is good for our brain. So if you go to a restaurant with a small menu that doesn't have a lot on it, that's actually better for you. You're going to be happier and enjoy your meal and be more satisfied at that restaurant than another one down the street that has this big menu with all these different items on it. So I have that, and so I've got all these routines in place to help reduce the amount of decisions I have to make, especially in the mornings. And sometimes I rigidly adhere to my routine, again, to the point where it drives my wife crazy. But I need to do it to, help me get through the day with my ADD. So, like, as soon as I get out of bed in the morning, the first thing I do is I drink my cup of coffee. And then the next thing I do is I use that energy, because I prefer to work out in the mornings because you just get it out of the way. You burn more calories throughout the day. So I'll maybe go on a 20-minute bike ride and maybe do some push-ups and do a quick workout. And then I'm ready to I already pre-made my breakfast and it's just sitting there in the fridge, so I just eat that real quick and just. And yeah, I adhere to that with an almost religious reverence, but I have to because I don't want to. I can't spend the time thinking about what am I going to make for breakfast this morning. What flavor of coffee would I prefer? Should I work out or shouldn't I? Or which workout should I do? I just have to do it and plan these things in advance. So Sometimes when I'm in conversation, and I'm especially bad about this, I actually did it just now. When I'm teaching in classes at church, or when I'm doing these live streams, I'm really bad about starting to say something and then mid sentence I'll stop and start saying something else to emphasize my point a little bit better. So sometimes I have a hard time just getting through a regular conversation before my brain kicks in and my ADD says, you need to go back and say this before you say that. And, it can make, like when I'm trying to explain something to someone, it can make it very hard for them to follow what I'm saying. So your brain lies to you when you've got ADD and it tells you things that aren't true. Just because also in a previous live stream, I've also got obsessive compulsive disorder, and your brain feeds you a lot of false information with a lot of what ifs and doomsday scenarios, and tells you that you have to do things that you don't really have to do, like wash your hands again just to make sure. And so ADD again feeds you false information because your brain gets so overloaded with different cycling thoughts that it's hard to focus, and you'll find yourself doing things like again stopping in mid sentence and starting to say something else, or um, for me, I used to never be on time for anything, and I've gotten a lot better than that since I got married, because my wife is kind of this voice on my shoulder who's like, you need to start getting ready when we're going to go somewhere. You need to start getting ready earlier. Before I met her, when I was single, man, I used to be late for everything, often 10 minutes late, because I would think about so many things and I would overthink things so badly that my brain couldn't process how long it was going to take me to get ready. And because, like I said earlier, there's fragmented information coming into your mind. And so it would tell me, like, well, you've got plenty of time to get ready. And in reality, I had these unrealistic expectations of how long it would take me to get ready and how long it would take me to get to wherever I was going. So, for example, like going to church, Sunday morning comes and the clock is ticking and I need to start putting on my nicer clothes and getting fixed up, but my brain would be distracted with watching TV and cleaning up things and picking up stuff off the floor and eating breakfast, and there's so much information cycling through my mind that my somewhere a voice would come in and say, you need to start getting ready for church because you're going to be late. But because I couldn't process how much time it would take to get me ready, I'd say, oh, well, I've got plenty of time. Oh, well, I've got plenty of time. Next thing you know, I'm late. And so I've gotten a lot better about that. I'm more on time for things than I used to be. But living with attention deficit disorder leads to a lot of frustration in life. And it's actually a difficult thing because you have so much difficulty navigating the world and living normally because you are in conflict with people a lot. And that's one of the hurtful things about it, is that, like I was saying with the teachers earlier, people always make the worst possible assumptions. And that's just, it's really human nature. People can't help it. But so they're trying to tell you something and you don't hear everything they're saying, or you only get part of it. And so the later you ask them a question and they'll look at you and get frustrated and say, I just told you that a few minutes ago. And I've seen this as a meme on Instagram, and it made me chuckle because it did remind me going back to school. So the teacher says, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Questions are good when you don't understand something. So the kid asks a question, I don't understand this, and the meme is the teacher is just like burning up and angry and losing patience, and got smoke coming out of her ears or whatever. So, and that's actually very true. So, I hate that phrase, I just told you this. Anyone with ADD hates hearing that phrase because, they'll say, like, you can't follow simple instructions. And they're right, you actually can't follow simple instructions. Your brain is wired to process information differently than a normal person's would be. And it's hard for people to be sympathetic because, like I said, people always assume the worst, so they assume you just weren't listening because you just don't like them, because you're just lazy. You didn't hear what they say because you're just lazy and you don't pay attention. And when you say, well, I have ADD, I have attention deficit disorder, people don't like that anymore. And it's partly because ADD has been so trivialized. Like, there's jokes about it, and, people talk about it like it's not that big of a deal. And it is a big deal. It's, I don't like to use the term mental illness, but it certainly is a mental health issue. And, your brain is wired to process that information differently, and people aren't sympathetic about that. And so you're always in conflict with especially authority figures. So, like all my life growing up, it was always the teachers. The teachers were always getting mad at me, always blaming me. And, I go home and I get in trouble, and my parents always assume, as parents often do, the teacher is always right and your kid is always wrong. Your kid's a little liar. He's a little weasel. He's trying to get out of his way out of doing his homework or whatever, and he's just lazy. And so parents often take the teacher's side, and they never stop and really think about, maybe my child's brain really processes information differently, and it does take a lot of patience. It takes a lot of patience to deal with someone with attention deficit disorder, and even in adulthood at work, you may have a job and your manager may say something, and you'll hear the instructions, but at the same time you're thinking about other things, like you're thinking about stuff going on at home. You're thinking about what are you going to eat for dinner that night. You're thinking about, what happened at breakfast. You're thinking about what you saw on the TV show last night, and your manager's trying to get important instructions across to you, but you're not going to hear the whole thing. You're going to hear maybe 3/4 of the message. And then later when you screw up the job or you don't do it right, you're going to get in trouble, and he's really going to get on you about that. And this is the struggle we have. And, when we're not on time for things, people assume that we're just lazy, that we just weren't, we're not applying ourselves, and we're not working hard enough, and, things like that. So the best way that I can illustrate attention deficit disorder is your brain is like a washing machine. So you imagine the washing machine has all these clothes in it, and it's just spinning and spinning and spinning and going through this cycle. And so with ADD, you've got these obsessive thoughts that are just spinning in your mind over and over and over and over again. And sometimes they're so quick that you can't keep up with them all. Sometimes you don't even realize what you're thinking about. So like I said, back to that story, I was actually carving little pictures in the back of that, that chair at school, and I didn't even realize I was doing it because there's just so many things going on in my mind. I'm thinking about something else, and I'm trying to listen to the teacher, and at the same time, that one might have been an anxiety thing, because anxiety also leads to a lot of compulsive habits like compulsive picking, compulsive hair twisting or hair pulling or things like that. Those are all symptoms of anxiety. Your brain is subconsciously making you do things like that, pulling at your hair or whatever, to basically to distract from the feeling of constant unbearable pain. But we'll talk about that in a different live stream. So another way to look at it is like you're trying to juggle, and you're trying to juggle too many things at once. So your brain is trying to juggle all the different things that it's thinking about. And, when the person tries to tell you something, the person of authority or whoever it is, it's like they're throwing that extra thing for you to juggle. And you just can't do it. You just can't juggle but so many things at once. And so, like when people holler, pay attention at you, they're kind of assuming that, you can just drop the other things. So like the other things you're thinking about aren't that important, and what I'm saying to you is more important. You need to focus. You need to pay me more attention. And it's not that simple, because your brain creates these different thought patterns so quickly. Your brain is wired to do it. It's like lightning. It's like those thoughts just appear, those different subjects to think about, and they just come into your brain so fast, and they cycle so quickly, and you're so consciously unaware of them. And so, like what I said at the end of that post on Facebook was that, if you don't have attention deficit disorder, if you could live in our brains for just a little while, you'd go crazy. Like if you knew what it was like to be us to live in our minds with our mindsets, you'd lose it, because your senses would get overloaded. You'd actually start like grabbing the sides of your head and screaming and going crazy, like make the thoughts stop, because you're not used to it. We've had to deal with it our entire lives. we have these obsessive thoughts, and like a lot of these things are tied together. So if you look at me and the things I've talked about in my live streams previously, for example, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, and attention deficit disorder, there's a lot of connections there. These things are related to each other, and they overlap with each other a lot. And so, along with ADD comes the obsessive thoughts, and that's also partly the obsessive compulsive disorder. And these things do emerge from anxiety. So, let me move on to the next subject because I want to talk about, from a medical psychological standpoint, attention deficit disorder. So, let me go back to my premise. And if you've been watching my live streams on mental health, you'll know what I'm talking about. That my thesis, or my theory, call it whatever you want, is that most mental health problems that we're struggling with in modern society can be traced back to our primitive ancestors. So if you go back to the Stone Age, when our ancestors lived out in the wilderness, in the fields, and had to struggle for survival, there's a lot of things in our brains that are wired there, that the way that our brains are structured. Now, we've built civilization, and we have, buildings and, structure and law and order, but our brains haven't caught up. And so our brains are actually still living, our mindsets, our psychologies are still used to living in the wilderness. And so we have all these survival mechanisms in place that it really goes back to, like you're struggling with things that are necessarily for survival, and that's where anxiety comes from, and then like obsessive compulsive disorder and compulsive habits, ADD, insomnia, anxiety, hoarding. I talked about that one week. Overeating. All these things, at the end of the day, they all break down to survival. What increases your odds of survival in the wilderness? And so our brains aren't used to the fact that we're not in danger anymore. So, like children, for example, they imagine that there are monsters hiding under the bed or hiding in their closets. And, if you go back only a few thousand years, those children actually did have to worry about being eaten by predators, and their parents had to guard them and carefully and watch over them. So even though monsters aren't real, it is a residual fear that's left over that has very primitive, ancient, prehistoric origins. And all those structures are still there in our brain. So if you go back to the concept of hunter-gatherers, so humans are designed to be hunter-gatherers. We're not really designed to live in cities. We're not designed to live in houses or buildings. We're not designed to go to work and work a 9 to 5. We're not designed to go to school. Our brains are completely created and crafted to be hunter-gatherers living in the wilderness. And when all those things rear their ugly head, we act confused. We don't know where they came from. And if we could just go back and understand, that's kind of the premise that I use to approach all psychology and all psychological studies. So attention deficit disorder is no different. And it really starts at a young age, and you think those children, they have trouble paying attention in school, and unfortunately we think the answer is to prescribe them medication. So we just assume, well, there's something wrong with your brain, you need to be put on medication so you can pay attention. And what it does is it sort of calms them, and it calms those ADD thought cycles. But that's not really good for the child, and it's not what their brain was meant to do. When they've got ADD, their brain is doing what it's naturally supposed to do. So go back to those hunter-gatherer years. Those children were not designed to sit there and sit still in a classroom listening to a teacher force feed them information that's not going to do them any good in life. They need, and again, people are going to say, how can you say this? How can you propose this? And I'm not proposing any simple solutions. I'm just kind of trying to confront you with a brutal, hard truth. Those children should be, in their natural minds, they should be out learning how to hunt and fish. That's what their minds are screaming out to do. And, they need to be learning how to be hunter-gatherers. And the tragedy of the school system is that we're force feeding them mostly useless information. And then we're judging them based on how well they retain the information. And we're, by punishing them for getting bad grades and failing them and doing all these things that destroy their self-esteem and make them feel horrible about themselves. And we, beat them and we punish them and we send them to the principal's office because they're not paying attention and we're going to fail them and they're going to, not make it to the next grade. We're punishing them even though we're setting them up to judge them by something arbitrary. Like, there's nothing in the way the brain is designed, and when children are growing up, the way their brains are formulating, the way the nervous systems or their brains are coming together, there's nothing in that says they need to be learning all these useless information facts that will do them no good in life, and being judged and being, hurt and punished because they're not paying attention, because they're not getting it all, because of their inability to comprehend it. Maybe, and again, the stuff we teach in school is important. Although I will point out this, in my opinion, the most important subject is actually philosophy. And I have studied philosophy intently over the past few years. And I'm going to tell you, that's what we need to be teaching kids. We need to teach them how to think for themselves. And instead, we teach them what to think. We force feed them just boring old facts. We need to teach them about history. We need to teach them about math, science. All these are important things, but we need to do it a different way. And I don't have an easy, exact solution. But what we're doing now is not working. It's failure. And I am so glad there is a mass exodus towards homeschooling, and they keep talking about it. And I think the COVID crisis may be one of the most important things to teach us the uselessness of brick and mortar schools and, arbitrarily forcing kids into this 8 to 4 routine that their brains weren't even made for, and then force feeding them all this useless information, and then making them, destroying their self-esteem. Children, honestly, what children want to do is they want to go out and play. When they're in school, they hate being in school. They're miserable, and they want to actually go out. They love recess, and, we only give them like 30 minutes of recess for them to run around on the playground. In reality, that should be the majority of what they're doing. And you may say, oh, come on, that's crazy, that's ridiculous. And that's just how programmed we are by modern society, by all the lies of, this government system we have going up. It's better for children. I actually will maintain play is more important for kids than learning what they learn at school. Now, learning is still important, but we need to do it a different way. But kids should be spending most of their time outdoors, because when they play with other kids and when they wrestle and, when they go out exploring, they're actually learning the critical skills they need. That's why they want to play so badly. That's why it feels good. That's why it's fun. Fun is actually a dopamine rush. Fun is actually your nervous system rewarding you for what you're doing. And, the misery of sitting there at school and being boredom and the anxiety that comes with it is actually punishment. That's actually your nervous system punishing you for what you're doing. So their nervous systems are trying to push them towards playing. That their natural instincts are to go out and play, and their instincts are against being sitting there in a boring classroom listening to a boring teacher all that time. And I can tell you, for me personally, I didn't learn much in school that was useful. And in fact, I've shared this before. One of the things that I'm most angry about is the fact that most of what I learned in high school was wrong. And I've learned that now that I'm out of school and I've taken an interest in all these subjects just on my own, that I've studied history, and I found out everything my world history and American history classes was a lie. All of it. Like, my teachers taught me nothing but myths. And if you go out and actually study academic literature on your own just for the sake of it, you find that out and you start getting really mad and really upset about that, because I've been lied to my entire life. So we indoctrinate kids more than we teach them. And I recently shared this, that my biggest obstacle to learning actually was school. And that's true. Learning should be fun and it should be engaging, and kids should be willing participants in it. And we need to reward them for their self-esteem. Like, we need to make them feel good. We need to make them feel a sense of reward when they get right answers. But we don't need to punish them when they get wrong answers and try to humiliate them or whatever, make them feel like there's something wrong with them. Like, grades should be thrown out. Grades are completely useless, and they destroy their self-esteem and their ability to go out and claim and have the boldness to conquer the world that they need. Like getting bad grades can destroy you and cripple you permanently from what you need to be out doing. And so, I can give you a great example of this. In the Amish, if you ask the Amish communities, like, what do you do with the kids that don't pay attention in class? They say, well, because the Amish, they all completely have their own community schools and they don't do, really public schooling any. And they'll say, well, the kids that don't pay attention, we don't put them in school. If they have trouble paying attention, we take them out and teach them how to hunt and fish. And those are actually some of the most successful and productive members of the Amish community. That's nature trying to tell us something. So that's been my story. Like I said, when I got out of school, actually, and really studying independently, so I'm an autodidact, which means that I learn more successfully when I teach myself, and because it makes me feel a sense of independence. So I never learned well in school, being taught stuff and being punished for getting bad grades or not doing well on tests in school. And so all the knowledge I have now, and actually it turns out the knowledge I have now is more true because I've learned how to filter out false information and how to test it in true information. I learned that from studying philosophy. We need to teach kids philosophy, and we need to learn philosophy, and teaching these things unlocks the real potential of your inner brain power. And so I apologize if I went off on a sermon about that, but I'm very passionate about this subject, and I just have nothing but hope and optimism for our kids. And so briefly, I'll touch on this because my battery is actually running really low. I need to hurry up and wrap this up before we, my battery runs dead and we get cut off suddenly. So, medication is a terrible idea. The psych medications that we give, especially giving them to children, remember that the ADD is actually the natural state of their brains, the kids who have ADD. And so having ADD is right, and not having it, is still normal, but they don't need to have medication put in their brains that changes the wiring in their brain, because that could actually cause permanent damage. And it's worth noting that with every school shooting we had, every time we have a shooting, a mass shooting, what they don't tell you, and they don't tell you this on the news because news organizations, even Fox News, are sponsored by big drug corporations. So you see commercials for anxiety medication or psychotropic drugs. Every single mass shooter has been on psychotropic drugs. Every single one. Like the Las Vegas shooter, the Sandy Hook shooter, every single one of them. So these drugs, and they're so easy. We talk about how guns are so easy for kids to get their hands on. Well, what about psychic medication? Like, that's even easier because all a kid has to do is have ADD, and the doctor will just say, "Oh, here's medication, boom." And we don't know how these things change the chemistry of their brain, and we've reaped some deadly consequences from that. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So I've given you the information. You can decide for yourself what to do with it from there. So I'll go ahead and wrap it up here. It was good doing another mental health live stream, and I hope you learned something from it, and we'll continue onward. Maybe I'll come up with another one to do for next week. So see y'all later.